All right, good morning. Or afternoon, depending on when you watch this video. So yesterday we spent a lot of time talking about the different ways that we use the land. Today we're going to discuss farming. We'll spend about 2 days on farming. So right now we have zoning laws and regulations on what we can build on and land and build on your land. With what you learned yesterday, should we have regulations? That's just something I want you to think about. In class, we're going to have a debate about it. If you want to email me your thoughts, you're welcome to. You don't have to, but just something to think about. So we're talking about farming today. Just a reminder, what type of irrigation is this? This is review from our lecture on the hydrosphere. This is regular or traditional irrigation. We talked about these are movable, which is great, but it wastes a lot of water, so we like drip irrigation, which is direct and targeted to the plant and the roots. So we have lots of problems with farming today, although we need farming undebatably or undoubtedly, because if we didn't have farming, we wouldn't have food. Some of the problems with farming today, though, and the way that we farm, is that our soil is not as healthy as it could be. A reminder, some of the essential nutrients that we need in our soil is nitrogen. Remember, nitrogen is what actually causes or helps our plant grow. That's what's found in a lot of our fertilizers. And phosphorus is also found in a lot of our fertilizers. So this is important in energy transfer with ATP in our plants. So if we don't have enough phosphorus, we can't have enough energy. If we don't have enough energy, we can't grow. So those are two of our limiting nutrients, meaning that they cause our plants to not be able to grow to their fullest. Generally, when our plants stop growing, it's because we're missing these nutrients if there's an issue with the soil. And then potassium is another essential nutrient that we need in our soil as well. Potassium helps to increase a plant's disease resilience or resistance, or the ability for the plant to fight diseases and pests. So one of the problems with farming today is that our soil doesn't have what we need, so our plants take out too much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, meaning that what's left isn't very nutrient rich, and our plants don't grow as well in that. We also need a diversity of crops and crops rotations. This is going to help increase our plant nutrients because different crops, while they all use these three nutrients, they use them in different amounts. Some need more, some need less. So rotating your crops year to year will help to preserve the soil. And it also, because of the diversity, we see a decrease in disease and pests, which is great because we want to fight against the disease and pests of our crops anyways. So that's why we like lots of different crops on a field, or rotating your crops every so often. Many farmers already do this with corn versus soybeans because corn is very nutrient pulling, meaning that it uses a lot of these nutrients. Soybeans don't really. So a soybean year will help protect the soil and put some of those essential nutrients back into the soil. Good. One of the problems, though, with why people don't rotate their crops is because each crop takes a specialized equipment generally. So I need to buy more equipment if I'm going to put different crops in. That's expensive, so some farmers don't do that, but it is better for the soil when we do rotate our crops. Soil also needs organic matter and composition, so this is thinking like manure or dead organic matter to kind of help return those nutrients into the soil. Remember, if we have decaying organisms, our decomposers will come in, and decomposers break down those dead organic organisms and put the nutrients back into the soil. If we have a lot of organic matter and compost, it will increase our soil's ability to hold water, meaning that our water is going to stay on our plants and not sink down into aquifers, which is good for plant growth, and it can also decrease soil erosion. We also use cover crops on farming, and this isn't a issue with farming. Cover crops will help our farms. Cover crops are things that we plant on the off season. They will help to decrease weeds because our crops there's something growing right there. It's not bare open field. It's going to decrease soil erosion like we talked about when we were talking about erosion just in general. Cover crops can help return nutrients to the soil, and they can decrease disease and pests because, again, we don't have just open soil. We have another system as well. What is monoculture? And we're going to look at some pictures of these as well. Monoculture is how we typically or traditionally farm today, especially after industrialization. Remember yesterday we talked about as we became more industrialized or built more factories and cities, we had to rely on farmers who make larger crops so that we could feed those people who were no longer making their own food. Agricultural practices have switched mostly to monoculture today. We only farm one type of crop. In short, monoculture means that we are producing or growing one single crop over a wide area, and this is traditional farming. So this is a little excerpt from a website that I found about the benefits of polyculture or multiple types of crops. It says, early in the morning, after a hot cup of coffee, Jim climbs onto his tractor, turns the key, and drives to the edge of his vast cornfield. The arms of the spray boom unfold, creating a wingspan of 120 feet. As Jim drives down designated rows, a combination of water and chemical spray over his crops, coating everything, but killing only the pesky weeds. While most perish under the harsh conditions, a few weeds survive. Application after application, season after season, more weeds survive. Attempting to save his corn yields while he makes some profit, Jim increases application rates and dates. However, as time goes on, nothing seems to help. The pesky weeds outsmarted the old farmer, leaving him to despair. So one of the things that we're seeing with monoculture is that we're having a lot of weeds and pests because we're only growing one type of crop. Not only that, but it's not as good for the soil. But with the weeds, one of the quick, easy ways that we fix our weeds and our crops is to spray weed killer or pesticides on our crops. The more we use pesticides and weed killers, the more our weeds and pests will become resistant to what we're spraying on. That's what this farmer is seeing right here. The weeds are becoming resistant to his spraying, so they end up dying, or so they end up growing and reproducing, and then because they reproduce, they're passing on the genes of resistance to their offspring, who then grow and reproduce. That's why Jim is having an increasingly difficult time getting rid of those pesky weeds. And this is something that we're seeing more and more with monoculture, or when we plant just one single crop. Again, pesticides here. Pesticides are chemicals used to eliminate or control a variety of agricultural pests that can damage crops and livestock, reducing farm productivity. So generally when we're talking pesticides, we're talking insects and bugs. Herbicides are substances used to kill unwanted plants or funguses. Some leave desired crop relatively unharmed, so we have fixed our problems. This goes along with biotechnology, what you learned in 8th grade. We have fixed our problems again and again with biotechnology. One of the things that we have done is we've engineered corn to be able to, this is called Roundup Ready corn. It's most of the corn that you see here is Roundup Ready unless you have an organic farm. It's a genetically modified variety of corn. It is resistant to herbicides or Roundup, which kills plants. So I can spray Roundup as much as I want on my Roundup Ready corn. But the problem is we then have a lot of Roundup used. So it kills the weeds, my corn stays, we're all happy and good, except sometimes that can have devastating effects on an ecosystem because we're spraying so many herbicides. Not only that, there's debates about whether the Roundup can still cause issues even though it might not kill the plant on the people that eat it. But that's just something to think about and a topic for another day. But herbicides are used to kill unwanted pests. Generally, they're going to put it on a tractor, like they're going to apply it to their crops with a tractor that looks similar to this. So you can see that white tank right there, that's full of the herbicide or pesticide, and generally some water because we dilute it often. And then it's connected to sprayer nozzles. The farmer will drive his rows of fields and spray on the herbicide or pesticide. Reminder, remind me, what do we call something that kills bugs? Hopefully you were able to identify for me that our pesticides are actually what we use to eliminate bugs. Remind me, what do we call something that kills weeds? Hopefully you were able to remind me that herbicides are what we would use to kill weeds. One example is Roundup. That's probably what you use in your household. So we call in the type of farming that we do now traditional or industrial farming, and we've got some big impacts on the lithosphere due to this type of farming or this large-scale farming that we see today. We see a lot of soil erosion because we have open, empty fields. We see a decrease in bee populations because of the demands for our farms and the use of pesticides. We see an emergence of pesticide-resistant weeds or herbicide-resistant weeds, meaning that our organisms are adapting to these pesticides and herbicides and becoming immune, so it doesn't kill them, and then they're passing their genes on, and their offspring then get the genes as well, and they're resistant, and then we get a whole population eventually. We're getting many aquatic dead zones because of eutrophication. Remember, that's when we have fertilizer that gets into our water supply and we get a huge algae growth. That algae growth kills the organisms in the area because it blocks the sunlight or because it dies, and then the bacteria that break down the algae actually use up all the oxygen in the system, and then there's no oxygen. We see depletion of phosphorus because of our plants pulling that essential nutrient from the ground, and then we're running out of it to make our fertilizers. We see depletion of fossil fuels because it takes a lot of energy to run this type of farming, and we see depletion of groundwater. We learned that with the Olalaga aquifer in the Midwest and how we are depleting it quite significantly and using the water much more quickly than it can recharge naturally. I want you to look at your partner. You don't have a partner at home. Maybe teach your dog or your sister or brother or perhaps your stuffed animal. Doesn't matter. Teach them at least 3 impacts of industrial farming. I've got a video about GMOs here. I'll link it on your page. Are GMOs good or bad? Hot topic in a debate that we have. Hopefully you've talked about them in your biotechnology unit, but you can watch the video. It's pretty interesting. I'll link it on your page. And we are actually missing one slide. Let's see where it is. The last thing we need to talk about are GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. GMO refers to genetically engineered. Genetic engineering is the process of transferring specific traits or genes from one organism to another into a different plant or animal. This is part of biotechnology. Hot topic today. Should we use GMOs? Should we not? We actually use a lot of GMOs, and we've been genetically modifying organisms for a very long time. We're just doing it a little bit differently and a little bit more scientifically right now than we have had in the past. Again, much concern has been raised over the inadequate testing of the effects of genetically engineering on humans and the environment. Specifically here we're talking about crops, but now we do have the technology to genetically modify or engineer a human. Is that something we want to do? Again, hot topic, something hopefully you've discussed in 8th grade, and perhaps if we have extra time, we can discuss in Earth and Environmental too. GMO stands for genetically modified organisms. It can be a plant, animal, or microorganism like a bacteria that is created by means that overcome natural boundaries, meaning that I take the genes of one organism, put them in another to try and create a new organism. We do this a lot. We do this in science. We do this with our research. We do this with our foods. So we could potentially create maybe a species of corn that grows a lot of corn, or grows very tall, or grows that is drought resistant. Really, the possibilities are endless here. It just depends on the inventor or scientist's imagination and their ability to experiment. All right, guys, that's the end of the lecture. I will link that GMO video so you can learn a little bit more. Tomorrow we'll come back with more sustainable farming methods than what we learned today, and hopefully you'll be inspired to farm differently or support practices of farming differently. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.